It's interesting today we come together for the same purpose we always do, to lift up and praise and glorify Jesus Christ. But we also on Mother's Day come together just to take a moment and recognize and say thank you to our mothers. I think I shared with you last year some of the things that my mother had taught me as I grew up, some of the practical things. She taught me the value of prayer and religion. I can remember her clearly coming into the house when I was about 8 and saying, "You better pray that comes out of the carpet, boy." And so I learned those kinds of lessons. She taught me about time travel. I can remember clearly her saying, "I'm going to knock you into the middle of next week." And so I learned that sometimes those kinds of things happen. She taught me about planning ahead. She taught me as I would leave the house, she would say, "You better have on clean underwear just in case you get in an accident." She taught me about irony. She told me, said, "Just keep on crying. I'll give you something to cry about." And so I learned a lot of things like that from her. She taught me what hypocrisy was. She would say, if I've told you once, I've told you a million times. Don't exaggerate." I say, "Okay, Mom, I hear that. I get that." She taught me about behavior modification. Said, "You better stop acting like your dad." And I learned what that meant. She taught me about the circle of life. She used to tell me on a fairly regular basis, "I brought you into this world, and I can take you out of this world." So I learned some things from her. She taught me about anticipation. I'm telling you, Sunday after Sunday in church, she would turn to me and point at me and say something like, "Wait till we get home." Or on a good day, she would say, "Wait till your father gets home." She taught me about medicine. She would say, "If you don't quit making that face at your sister, your face is going to freeze that way." And I learned that was apparently a danger. She taught me about my roots. She said, "Close the door, boy. Were you born in a barn?" By the way, I wonder if Mary ever said that to Jesus. Because, he would have kind of had an answer. And then she taught me what justice was when she said, "Someday you're going to have children, and I hope they're just like you." So I learned a lot of things from my mother. Met a lady once who said that when she went to college, she said, "Before I got married, I had 3 theories about raising children." Said, "Now I have 3 children and no theories." Yep, that's kind of how it goes. I will tell you this, and I'll move on. It's an old story about a man walking along the beach one day, and he found an old genie bottle. And he rubbed that bottle, and lo and behold, out popped the genie. And the genie said, "I'm tired of people asking for 3 wishes." Said, "You just get 1 wish. Make it, and I'll grant it." And the man said, "Well, I've always wanted to visit Hawaii, but I'm just afraid to fly. So I want you to build a bridge from California to Hawaii so that I could drive from here to there." And the genie thought for a minute and said, "I don't believe I can do that. That's too tough. That's too difficult a task. You're going to need to come up with a backup wish." And the man stood there a minute and said, "Well, I've been married 4 times, and I've never understood the women." Said, "If you could just help me to understand women." And the genie looked at him and said, "Now, do you want that bridge 2-lane or 4-lane?" Well, I get all that. So at any rate, I do want us to recognize that today is Mother's Day. You know that I like to tell you where sermons are born. This is kind of an unusual sermon, and it's born in kind of an unusual place. Do you know the name John Ortberg? Anybody know that name? Well, there's a church in California called Menlo Park Presbyterian Church. It's the 9th largest Presbyterian church in America. has thousands of members. It owns a building and land that is worth $9 million. Condoleezza Rice is a member of that church. It's one of the most influential churches in all of America. Now, I talked to you a couple weeks ago about one of the things about being Baptist is we own our own stuff. We make our own decisions. The people at the denominational level, they work for us. We tell them what to do. They don't get to tell us what to do. But that's not true in the Presbyterian Church. So the Presbyterian Church began in Menlo Park's mind. The Presbyterian Church began to drift from the gospel. They began to preach that Allah and God were the same, and you could be saved by following Allah or be saved by following Buddha. And Menlo Park finally came to a point that they decided we're leaving the Presbyterian Church. We're not going to be Presbyterians anymore. We're not going to be associated with what they're preaching and teaching. And they walked out. And the presbytery came to them and said, okay, you're allowed to leave, but you need to understand that we own the building. So you can take your church and go down to some warehouse and rent it out, but this $9 million building that you've got, it's not going with you. And the church voted 80% to 20% to go ahead and leave. Give up the $9 million and walk away from it. Now, I have to tell you, I think that's a pretty bold thing to do in the name of Christ. If you've decided that your church is not preaching the gospel, and you've decided that we're going to preach the gospel even if it costs us $9 million, I appreciate that. Now, I tell you that story to tell you that John Ortberg is the pastor of that church. I have read, John Ortberg has written several little books, and I've read them for years. I've always liked him. I've always liked reading his books. But when I read that story again the other day, it got me reading John Ortberg books again. And I hadn't read them in several years, and I picked up the first one I wanted to read, and the name of that book is, If You Want to Walk on the Water, You Got to Get Out of the Boat. And as I read that book, I thought, I want to preach that. I love what's in this book, and I want to preach that sermon, but I can't tell them that it's really just a John Ortberg book condensed, so I'll hide the title. If I say, if you want to walk on the water, you got to get out of the boat, somebody's going to figure out that I just took it out of John Ortberg's book, so I'll try to come up with some kind of a camo title. You know, I'll kind of disguise it. Like maybe I'll call it Stepping Out of the Boat. Or maybe I'll call it The Dry Boat People. Then Madeline asked me last night on the way home, said, Papa, what are you preaching tomorrow? And I kind of began to tell her, and she said, well, what are you going to title it? And I said, do you know what a couch potato is? And she said, yep. I said, well, I'm thinking about titling the sermon, Boat Potatoes. People who just sit around in the boat. They don't do anything. They don't try anything. Maybe I'll just call it Boat Potatoes. So with that in mind, turn with me to the 14th chapter of Matthew. You know this story. I'll read it very quickly, but you've heard it all your lives, and I'm not going to tell you anything today that you didn't know. I'm just going to remind you of a couple of things. By the way, the story starts in verse 22, but verse 21 ends the part right ahead of it, and it's the feeding of the 5,000. And in verse 21 it says, and those that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides the women and children. Now I want to tell you that after being here at the banquet last night, I think the women outate the men. And so it's not fair for us just to think about the 5,000 men who ate. We need to count the women and the children too. Then verse 22 comes. Right away, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and go ahead of him to the other side, and he sent the multitudes away. And when he sent the multitudes away, he went up to a mountain separately to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. The ship was now in the middle of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch, that's about 3 to 6 in the morning, in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, and they said, "It's a spirit, it's a ghost." And they cried out, afraid. And right away Jesus spoke to them and said, "Be of good cheer. It is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered and said to him, "Lord, if it's you, then bid me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." And when Peter came down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But then he saw the wind blowing so, and he became afraid, and he began to sink. And he cried and said, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they came to the ship, the wind stopped, and those in the ship came and worshipped him and said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So now you know that story. You've heard it all your life. But I want to just make a comment or two that you might have forgotten about. First of all, I want to think about being a disciple in the boat. I wonder how they told the story the next day. Here they are. It's 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the middle of the morning. There's a terrible storm. And they're telling somebody in town, "You wouldn't believe it. We're in the middle of this terrible storm. We're in the middle of the boat. We look out on the water, and we thought we saw a ghost walking toward us on the water." And then a voice spoke, and it was the voice of Jesus Christ walking on the water. It was amazing. I'm sitting there in the boat thinking, what in the world is going on? Talk about freak city. When you're sitting in the boat in the middle of the lake and the storm is blowing, you don't look up expecting somebody to come walking to you on the water. In fact, if you're in the water and you're walking, chances are you're walking under the water. And they knew that. And I can't imagine them telling the story. And then they would say, and then Peter, just like old Simon Peter, opened his big old mouth and said, "Can I come out there and walk with you?" Peter was always trying to be the Lord's favorite. And he got up out of the boat and he started walking, and almost immediately he began to sink. And of course Jesus rescued him and reached down and picked him and grabbed him and pulled him up. I wonder if they made fun of Peter the next day. I wonder if Andrew laughed and said, "Man, Peter just made a fool of himself again last night. Peter just did something." Peter's always looking around for a new way to fail Jesus. I wonder if they wondered if he learned his lesson. Maybe next time he'll stay in the boat with the rest of us. And then we look at the setting. They've just heard John the Baptist has been beheaded. Immediately, Jesus feeds the 5,000. John the Baptist has had his head cut off. The honeymoon is over. It's the end of the first year. Everybody's kind of listening to Christ. But now, by the end of that first year, the opposition is beginning. The trouble is starting. Last night, anybody here related to the bride or groom last night? Well, last night there was a wedding here. Before the wedding was over, they stood right back there and had a big old fight. And I thought, well, this is going to be a great honeymoon. You know, the opposition has begun. You know, the trouble is on. And the disciples are aware of that. But they've got no time to grieve about it, because the next thing that happens is they're feeding the 5,000. And then Jesus says, "Get in the boat." The Greek says he made them get in the boat. He urged them to get in the boat. And then came the storm. So let me make a couple of points. Won't take very long. First of all, I want you to notice in the whole story that God had a plan. God had a purpose. God's got a plan, and it's a good plan. Folks, sometimes I look at my life and I think I'm in the middle of a storm. I'm in the middle of the sea and the storm is blowing. Sometimes I look at the life of this church and I think we're in the middle of a storm and the storm is blowing. But I want you to know, based on verse 22, Jesus Christ had a plan. He knew what was going on. He told them, "Get in the boat." Folks, I want you to understand the key to survival in this life is knowing God's got a plan. Knowing God's in control. That there are no real surprises here. You may know the old story about the naval commander who had always dreamed of being a battleship commander. And as they're out in the ocean headed in one day, he sees a shining beacon out there. And he radios ahead and says, "This is battleship whatever it is, and I'm headed toward you. You need to alter your course 10 degrees. And the answer comes back and says, "Nope, you need to alter your course 10 degrees. And that goes on 2 or 3 times, and finally the battleship commander gets on the radio himself and says, "I'm the commander of this battleship, and I'm telling you, you have to alter your course 10 degrees. And the answer comes from the other side, "So I'm telling you, you have to alter your course 10 degrees. I'm a lighthouse." And so he's headed. I'm just trying to say to you folks that there is a non-changing beacon that you better get in line with. There is a light out there that whatever you have to do to alter your course to stay in line with God's plan for your life. I don't mean to be harsh. I don't mean to be rude. But I don't really care who you are. I don't really care how important you are. I don't care how long you've been in the church. I don't care how many times you've stayed when other people left. I'm telling you, God's Word stands forth as a non-changing lighthouse, and every course we think has to be altered to God's Word. We have to follow what the Lord wants in our lives, and we have to follow it as a church. If God's plan for you and God's plan for this church is good, then we have to make time to listen and obey that plan every day. Let me tell you a second thing very quickly. This scripture says that God sees everything that's happening. He's not caught by surprise. Get the picture. Jesus says, "Get in the boat and go to the other side." Then he comes up on the mountaintop to pray. But he sees the boat. He looks down there and he knows what's going on. He sees the storm come. He's up on the hillside. He sees them in the storm and he comes to them. He sees what's happening. Folks, it encourages me just to know that whatever storm I find my life in, God knows I'm in that storm. That whatever storm I find this church life in, God knows we're in that storm. So just remember these 2 details. God's got a plan, and God sees everything we're going through. Everything that's happening, everything that develops, everything that's taken place in our life. Now, a third thought real quickly. Now, did you notice I said I wanted to make a couple of points? And now we're going to go to number 3. But you've caught on by now, right? And so a third thought. God showed up in that case right on time. They might have wanted it quicker. Can you imagine being in the boat? Jesus showing up, walking on the water, and they're looking at each other saying, "Hey, that's a ghost." And then Jesus shows up, and what did he say? "Cheer up, boys." Yeah, fat chance. I'm out here in the middle of the storm. The wind's blowing everywhere. I'm scared to death, and here comes some ghost walking on the water, and the first thing this ghost says is, "Cheer up. Don't be afraid." Folks, I got to tell you, I don't know why God doesn't answer my prayer when I want him to. You know, I understand God's got a plan. It's a good plan. I need to learn to listen to it. I need to learn to follow it. But doggone, I wish he'd do things when I tell him to. I wish he'd just settle down and let me pray and say, "Now, God, we need this. I need this in my life. My church needs this in its life." I don't know why God doesn't do what I want him to do, but I can tell you that he does what's right to be done when the time is right for it to be done. It's his decision. God's got a plan. I don't know what it is. I don't know when it is, but I know I can trust it. Think of the times that it seemed like God wasn't answering prayer. You know, he showed up 2 days late for Lazarus, don't you? You know that they're all sitting around saying, "Man, if the Lord would have been here, he wouldn't have died." But he showed up when he was supposed to show up, right? You know that he told Abraham and Sarah, "You're going to have a baby. You're going to be parents." And they waited years. You know that he told Joseph, "You're going to be great and your brothers are going to bow down and worship you." And then Joseph ended up in prison. Wonder if Joseph thought, hey God, When are you going to do what you said you're going to do? I can't answer that, but I can tell you God will show up when He's supposed to show up. He's got a plan. It's a good plan. It's a plan that will help me grow, and it's a plan that God will do what He's supposed to do when He's ready to do it. Let me make a fourth point. Somehow in all of that, we always grow. Here's a mistake I think we make as a church. I think we think growth is about numbers. Now, I got to tell you, I do a quick head count here this morning. I count 30 people who weren't here the first Sunday I preached here a year and a half ago. So you want to talk about numbers? I'll do that with you. But church growth is not just about numbers, folks. It's about what the church is doing within itself. Look at the things that we're doing. Do you know that 2 years ago we didn't have a Bible school? This summer, the last week in July, we're going to have what may be the best Bible school in Boone County. We're going to stand up and brag about it. We're going to go out and tell the people we work with. We're going to tell the neighbors. We're going to say, you come to Bible school, we do it, and we're doggone proud of what we do. When I got here, we didn't have a Sunday school. We had 45 people in Sunday school this morning. When I got here, we didn't have Wednesday night church. We have 30 people in Wednesday night service on a typical Sunday. When I got here, we were talking about discontinuing children's worship. It's not unusual for me to do pastor's pals to 20 children. We were talking about letting it discontinue. When I got here, we didn't sing as a choir. Now, when the choir sings, there's not a one of you who doesn't enjoy it, and we stand up and we're proud of it. We do trunk or treat. We do Mother's Day banquets. We do the festival down in Hebron. We're a vital part of that. We're growing. It's not just about numbers. It's about growing internally as a church. I'm telling you, as long as we've been here, we know each other better and we care more about each other than we have in the past. I get that. And I just want to say to you folks, I hope you understand the time has come. I know you've had it before, but it's come again when you can go stand out in this community and say, I'm proud of my church. My church is doing good. I'm proud of the things we do, and I've got to tell you, the growth I see inside you as a people is amazing. I'm going to tell you, maybe you figured it out, maybe you didn't. My first 2 or 3 weeks here, or 2 or 3 months, man, it was pretty tough church. I mean, we had people sitting on this side who wouldn't speak to people on that side. Remember that? We had people who wouldn't, we'd do hug and howdy. They'd go all the way around the building to avoid some of you. They'd walk all the way around to keep from having to smile at you or shake hands with you. Well, I'm not a bit too proud to tell you there's a handful of those people we said, you know, if you're so doggone unhappy, maybe you ought to just find another one. I'm telling you, this church is growing, and it's growing in its love. It's growing in its compassion. And my honest opinion is that those people who left here, they're lost. It's to their detriment. So in the middle of that storm, Simon Peter said, if that's you, Lord, let me come to you. Man, if I ever heard a Simon Peter statement, that's it, ain't it? Sounds just like him, don't it? Lord, I want to walk on the water too. It's funny. Storms bring growth in our life. Folks, and all I really came to say to you today is that if you're ever going to share that experience with Simon Peter of walking on the water, of doing something outside the comfort of the boat, you got to get out of the boat. So we come in on Sunday morning. We got a pretty nice little boat going here. You know, we're paying our bills. We got the best preacher in northern Kentucky. Got the best looking pastor we've ever had. You know, we got good music. We got good Sunday school. We got good things going on. It's kind of comfortable here in the boat. We just kind of play it safe. Let's not bite off anything new. We're pretty happy. Wonder how the history of the world would be different if Noah would have said, I don't think I want to take that chance. What if Noah had played it safe? Or what if David decided, I feel a little better back here tending sheep than I do out there fighting giants? Or what if Mary told the angel, I don't think I want to sell that virgin birth story. I don't think my mom and dad and I don't think Joseph are going to buy that. So just move on to somebody else. Or for that matter, what if Jesus had turned to God one day and said, now let me get this straight, Dad. Have you met those people down at San Run? And you want me to go die for them? You want me to go give up my life so their sins can be forgiven? Do you know those people? What if Jesus had decided to play it safe? So my call today is, sometimes we've got to get out of the boat. And the last thing I would say to you, I want you to notice when this story is all over, they ended up exactly where Jesus meant for them to be. Exactly in the right place at the right time. Isn't it amazing? When we listen to Jesus, we end up where he wants us. It's not that complex, folks. I used to say this is not my first radio. Then I found out that it's really not my first rodeo. Not the first time we've been through this hoop, folks. You'd think we'd know by now. When we do what Jesus tells us to do, we end up where Jesus wants us to be. I'll just tell you honestly, some of you know it. I look at my own life. I know what I want. I know what I think. I'm not a bit bashful about what I think sometimes. Sometimes I don't listen to God. Connie tells me, and I have to have it explained to me all the time, Connie tells me I'm not a good looker. Now, obviously, she don't mean this. You know, anybody knows better than that. But you know what else she says to me? She says, you're not a good listener. She says, I just hear what I want to hear when I want to hear it. I wonder how many times God said that about us. I wonder how many times God's looked down there and say, holy cow, don't you ever just sit down and hush and listen? Don't you ever just hear what the Lord says? So let me just tell you, the things I want you to remember today, no matter what storm you're in, I want you to know Jesus knows you're in it. No matter what the situation in the church, in your life, on your job, no matter what the situation with your children, your mother, your grandmother, I want you to know God knows you're in that storm. And that Jesus Christ is there to rescue you. And I just would simply say it this way, folks. There's no problem too big for God. No such thing as a problem God can't handle. He can deal with this. Peter knew that if Jesus could walk on the water in the middle of the storm, he could take care of Peter in the middle of the storm too. But then I also want you to remember on a very practical level, we got to get out of the boat, folks. We got to stop operating in our comfort zone. We got to stop just coming into church saying, okay, Sarah and Kate, Joe and Paul, lead us in music. We'll sing when we're in the mood. We'll raise our hands if somebody else raises our hands. We'll clap if somebody else will start it. And then we look up at the preacher and we'll cross on and say, go on, big boy, bless me if you can. Do something biblical if you think you're capable. We've got to get out of the boat, folks. We come in here, we're fairly complacent, we're fairly happy. Kind of like those disciples sitting in the boat. They were feeling kind of safe. They were feeling kind of like things are okay. But I wonder what God would ask you to do in this church. I wonder what God would ask you to do that's maybe out of your comfort zone. I wonder if he'd ask you to sing in the choir, or teach a Sunday school class, or serve on a committee, or commit to Sunday school, or commit to Wednesday night church. I wonder what God would ask us to do outside our comfort zone. Maybe join a church. Maybe be baptized. Maybe say, doggone, I believe this is where Jesus wants me. And I understand, folks, I've learned in my own life that when I do that, sometimes I'm going to get scared. Sometimes I'm going to start to sink, and you know what's going to happen? He's going to reach down there and grab me and hold me up. And I'm just here telling you, I'd rather be a wet water walker than a dry boat rider. I can deal with being a little wet. I get comfortable. I get it. I don't know how to swim. Now, I was a Marine. And way back yonder, the Marines were part of the Navy. So you couldn't be a Marine and not learn how to swim. So they took us. They taught us all how to swim, but not me. I would sink. And all those people who tell you fat floats, no, it don't. Fat sinks just like skinny sinks. So I never learned how to swim. So I'm about 25 years old, running around with a bunch of 25-year-old guys. We all took a weekend, went down to North Lake, rented a houseboat, went out on the houseboat, and decided everybody was going skiing. Not me. I can't swim from me to Emily. You know, I can't swim from me to Edgar. But doggone, it's embarrassing. Being out there on the boat with a half a dozen big, strong men, and they're all getting up skiing, and you're saying, well, my leg's hurting a little bit today. I think I'll wait till tomorrow. Finally, as they skied, I noticed everybody who skis wears a life jacket. So I figured out, I don't have to tell them I don't know how to swim. All I got to do is put on a life jacket and tell them I don't know how to ski. And then they said, well, time to learn, get in the water. So it didn't take me very long to figure out that as long as I kept that life jacket good and tight around me, I could get in the lake. I'd jump out of the boat, get in the lake, and they'd say, did you know it's 300 feet deep here? I'd say, I don't care. I got on a life jacket. I'd get very comfortable in that life jacket. Now, man, don't take it off me. And by the way, I never did learn to ski. Never did learn to swim. But I got very comfortable in the lake, and I'm not a bit afraid to jump in the water as long as I got my life jacket on. As long as I'm comfortable. I do that in church. I come into church, I'm very comfortable. I put on my little life jacket. We don't tackle anything new. We don't deal with any really big issues. Say, oh, we'll let the next guy deal with that. We'll let the next guy take that situation on. And we just kind of get comfortable. And all I really want to say, folks, is sometimes we just got to get out of the boat and focus on the guy who called us out of the boat. And when the distractions come, and they will, and our faith wavers, and it will, we cry out to him, and he will always answer us. But Jesus wasn't in the boat. Jesus was on the water. Every time you get out of the boat, you're going to find your faith grows a little bit. I got to tell you, and I'll close. I believe God's got some great things planned for San Juan Baptist Church. Some great purposes for us. But nothing's ever going to be accomplished in this church until we know we're not going to sit back and relax in the boat. We've got to be out of the boat. We've got to be taking that risk. We've got to be letting our faith grow in Jesus Christ. No great thing ever happens until we focus not... I mean, it's impossible to walk on water. You know that, don't you? I mean, I get that. But I also get that Jesus told Simon Peter, come on out, boy. And as far as I know, he's the only mortal man who ever went to heaven and said, I walked on the water. I'd like to be in that crowd, wouldn't you? I'd like to be one of those guys who says, yeah, I listened to the Lord. I did what the Lord wanted when the Lord wanted it. And sometimes I fell. Sometimes he had to pick me up. Sometimes I sunk. Sometimes he had to reach down and grab me. But, man, I'm glad I'm wet. I'd rather be wet than dry. I'd rather be one of those guys who went out on the water than one of those guys who sat back in the boat and criticized and laughed at the guy who went out on the water. In my sense of that story, you can identify with the 11 guys in the boat, or you can identify with the one guy who said, I'm getting out on the water. There's some water walking we need to do, folks. There's some commitments we need to make. There's some decisions we need to make as a church. There's some decisions we need to make in our life. And you say, oh, I'm just not comfortable with that. Well, who cares? You think Simon Peter was comfortable walking on water? I mean, do you think that's even possible? I wonder what he thought when he stepped out of the boat and he put his foot out there the first time. You think he was comfortable? Or do you think he was saying, Lord, if that's you, then bid me come to you, and I'm coming. Lord, if this is what you want for me, I'm doing it. Lord, if this is what you want for this church, I'm doing it. I'm not too worried about how comfortable I am. Let's stand and sing, and I'll hush. That's part of the problem. I know when to start, I just don't know when to quit. So I challenge you today, identify in your life. I don't care what storm you're in, God knows you're in it. I don't care what the situation is, God knows your situation. He'll come to you. He'll come on time. And I want you to understand, sometimes you got to just get out of your comfort zone and say, I'm going to do what God calls me to do. Let's sing, You Come. I'll meet you right here.